Okay, so I'm going to do a quick review of Lost Connections by Johann Hari. I've noticed there's been a few reviews online on YouTube of this one. I really quite enjoyed it. I thought it was good. Some of the criticism I think has been by people who have suffered with mental health, and they've kind of talked about the fact that he isn't very keen on medication, and he talks a lot about his own experience of how he was medicated from a young age by his doctor. And that was kind of the very limited sort of help that he got, basically. And the whole thing that he's sort of saying in the book is that we need to sort of get away from medicating. We need to understand that actually mental health is actually quite a normal response to quite a sort of chaotic world where we're not really connecting with each other in the way that perhaps we should be. And I think he does have a very serious point there. Just the fact that we're online so much, we're on our phones, we don't meet up with people in the same way that we might have done in the past. I think that's fairly well accepted that is something that we're not so good at nowadays, and I do think that is something that is affecting our mental health a lot, just from the work that I do in social care. The people that I've worked with mental health difficulties, and if ever I've kind of struggled before with mental health, it's often generally about the people that you're around, or the people who you're not seeing as often as you'd like to, and things like that. So he talks about the importance of connections. He gives some really good examples, some stories of people that he interviewed. I found it really interesting that he talks about careers, and how if you're doing something that you don't consider to be meaningful to you. He talks about this guy who works in a paint shop, and he's just pouring out paint every day, and he's just doing this, he's acting like a robot, and it just doesn't mean anything to him, but he has to pay the bills. And it's this kind of depressed feeling of going to work that lots of people have, and I've had it before, where you've got a job where you just don't feel as though you count for very much. You just turn up, you do your job, you make your money for the person who owns the company, and it just becomes really depressing. And I really related to that, because I'm someone who struggled for years with my job, with my career. Eventually I got in and started my own business, and I never look back. I feel fantastic for that. I do other work as well, careers advice for young people, which I really enjoy. I help carers as well. But yeah, working for myself has definitely been the best thing that I did in terms of my job. I couldn't stand just going through the motion, just turning up at a certain time of day, not getting paid particularly well, and just the time just disappearing. So he does talk about that being really important. And one of the points he makes is that the less control we have at work, the more difficult we find it, the more depressed we become. And I think that just hits the nail on the head. I think when you're somewhere where you feel as though you have to be there at a certain time, you cannot do anything other than what you're allowed to do, what you're told to do. You can't be creative, you can't be innovative, you can't be yourself. I think when you find yourself in that situation, that is what becomes depressing, and that's why people become depressed at work and hate their work. And inevitably, the companies who do this to people aren't going to last. They're not going to succeed in the end, because there are more forward-thinking, more dynamic companies out there who will take people on, and who will allow them to express themselves, who will allow them to manage themselves to a certain extent. Companies who allow people to work from home and who trust people generally, don't always get better results, because it's not something that is necessarily that common, that they haven't necessarily worked out how to do it well yet in some cases, I suppose. But the companies that do get it right, and it works. And it's this idea of being micromanaged and stuff that just never works, that I've talked about before in other videos. If people feel as though they've got someone breathing down their neck, they're far less likely to perform well. And these old-fashioned kind of managers and companies just sort of think, well, yeah, I need to know where you are, how I'm getting my money's worth out of you, etc., etc. And it's just a short-sighted way of seeing things. So I found that really interesting. But there's a girl who did a review on YouTube, and she's sort of slagging him off, saying that he's completely wrong because he talks about getting rid of medication. Well, as far as I can remember from listening to the book, he does say in there that for some people at certain times do need it. So he does accept that there is a need for it. But I think what he's trying to say is that we need to get away from this kind of habit of kind of medicating, and actually, through kind of social prescribing, understanding what it is that people need. And I think that's a perfectly valid point. So I don't think he is saying that. I think if he was just saying medication is absolutely rubbish, get rid of it altogether, then I would have kind of switched off and kind of lost respect for what he's saying, because I think you have to understand that there is a medical need for some people. If someone's sort of suicidal, then some people will need that medication to get them out of that hole, and then work on the other stuff, the exercise, the connecting with people, the relationships and stuff, and get that right. So we know that, and a lot of GPs do know that as well. So when he says my GP did this and that. You know, not all GPs are like that. A lot of GPs will sort of say, you know, are you exercising? Are you eating properly? Are you sleeping? They will check all of that sort of stuff. They won't just necessarily throw drugs and medication at you straight away. So, but I don't think that's, like I say, that's what he was talking about, his experience. That's what he was given from a young age. He had limited knowledge at the time. He just accepted the medication, the drugs, and he just found that it didn't work for him. He didn't, you know. So it's crucial that we kind of get that right. So I found that really interesting. One of the things that I found most interesting from a sort of personal development point of view, for something that I've tried to implement in my life to a certain extent, is a type of meditation that someone he knew, a female friend of his, tried. So she had a lot of anger, jealousy, I think it was. She found herself being jealous of people who were successful, like her cousin, I think it was, he said. Whenever she was successful, she felt jealous of her and couldn't feel happy for her, and just made her angry and anxious, and she started to dislike herself, and that's quite a common thing for people, I think. You know, we live in this Instagram world where people are putting this false image of themselves being really successful and really happy, and it's very easy to sort of look at people and become kind of angry. Or personally, I personally don't struggle with that very much. I may well have done when I was younger, potentially. I don't think I did too much, but maybe a little bit. But I know lots of people do. I consider myself very lucky. I'm quite good with gratitude and that sort of stuff, but I think I can see how it's easy for people to become like that, with all the sort of false messages that people put on Facebook, on Instagram and things like that. So what he said she did, and I don't remember the exact name of it, but what she did was, anytime she found herself facing someone like that, she would try to imagine that person happy for whatever reason. She'd try to imagine that person as happy as possible, and then try to find joy in herself at their happiness. And it sounds a bit ridiculous and a bit fluffy and a bit kind of unrealistic, but she found that if she practiced that often enough, for the first week, few weeks, month or whatever, she found it really difficult. This is never going to work. But she found that in time, she was just finding life so much of a nicer, more pleasant experience. She was actually feeling empathy and joy towards people. She would look at someone and she'd just sort of think, imagine them really happy doing this, and she'd train herself through meditation to feel sort of happy and joy for that person's happiness. Like I say, it sounds really weird, but I've tried it myself, and I haven't tried it enough yet to kind of be able to say that it's fantastic as she does. But I have found that it does work to a certain extent, and you know, it's easy, isn't it, to look at someone and to allow them to annoy you, and they've said something that's irritating you, or you're tired, or you're a bit stressed, and they do something that grates on you a little bit. And if you can just try and put that sort of practice in, it does work, and it is a really good personal development tool. It's a real good sort of mindfulness, sort of taking control of your feelings and your positivity levels, and just taking control and just saying, right, I'm not going to feel like crap about that. I am going to feel better. So that was the big takeaway for me from the book. But I do recommend it. It's a good book. I listened to it on Audible. Johann Hari himself narrates it. He does a good job. There might have been a couple of bits in there that grated on me a little bit, that I thought were a little bit self-righteous potentially, a little bit cringy, but most of it I thought was really good, and I think most people could benefit from listening to it. But certainly don't take the medication thing too. If you're someone who's suffering from mental health and you need antidepressants, it doesn't mean you're going to be on them for the rest of your life. And sometimes, but that's not for me. I'm not a doctor. That's not for me to say that. But you need to take advice from your doctor and do it properly. You know, what he says is very valid, but don't, like this person that I saw on YouTube, take it too literally, too black and white, because I'm sure I really don't think he meant it that way. But anyway, really good book, Lost Connections by Johann Hari, highly recommended.